You saw Trump on the thumbnail and made you click, didn't I? This is perhaps the easiest list I ever made, not because they were flawless presidents, but because the others were so much worse than them. This is not my opinion, this is objectively the truth, and what I say is absolute law, and if you disagree with me, you will find me under your bed tonight. With that obvious sarcasm out of the way, let's commence! Number 5. Calvin Coolidge, the most humble president USA ever had. He made a name for himself for being reserved and quiet, granting him the nickname Silent Cal. He was the third president that had signed the most executive orders during his term, with a whopping 1,200 executive orders to be precise. I would argue that those executive orders were more than necessary to fix the mess Woodrow Wilson and Warren G. Harding made. Two of the worst presidents that granted almost absolute power to the federal government, and Calvin had to fix that. He managed through those executive orders and other bills he passed throughout his presidency to greatly limit the power of the federal government, respecting the Constitution of the United States and respecting the state's freedom for self-governance. During his administration, USA experienced a massive economical growth and prosperity for both corporate America as well as working class America. He managed to do that by micromanaging the economy. He reduced the national budget, he cut taxes for both corporate conglomerates and the working class, and he was one of the very few presidents that actually managed to pay a big part of the national debt, a thing that the presidents of the last 100 years managed to only increase. Ah yes, gotta love the Federal Reserve printing money out of thin air, right Joe? Calvin Coolidge was responsible for the famous Roaring Twenties, where there was economical prosperity throughout USA. It was also massive degeneracy and decadence, but we're not gonna talk about it. All in all, he was objectively a great president. Too bad he served only one term and half of the term of Warren G. Harding when he fortunately died, because he was one of the worst presidents. Calvin Coolidge served from 1923 to 1929 and was a president who minded his own business, as he said in this famous quote. Yeah, I wish I could say the same about 90% of all presidents. Number 4. Teddy Roosevelt. Arguably the most badass, the coolest, and the toughest president USA ever had. He was a larger-than-life persona with his infectious optimism, charisma, and his great oratorical skills. He was one of the few presidents that was very active. He fought in the Spanish-American War, where he was the colonel for the 1st U.S. Volunteer Cavalry Division. He served in the New York National Guard and was the police commissioner of New York from 1895 to 1898. He was appointed to reform the Department of the Police and put an end to corruption within the system. He was the first president who was actually an environmentalist. He created 5 national parks spanning 230 million acres of public lands, including 150 forests and 55 bird reservations. He was also the very first president to let the press inside the White House. He was a very big supporter of the free press and fair, unbiased journalism. Wish I could say the same about the presidents of today. He was a fighter for the common man by trying to break up corporate monopolies by adding antitrust laws. In 1912, during a speech for his presidential campaign, running for a 3rd term, yeah, back in the day you could run for more than 2 terms, but you can't do that anymore thanks to FDR. He was shot in the chest during his speech. Thankfully, his dense overcoat slowed the bullet, but still wounded Teddy. The culprit was apprehended. And guess what Teddy did after that? He hopped on stage and finished his speech! Bro, can this guy be more unfathomably based? I wish more presidents were more like Teddy Roosevelt and less like the corporate puppets they are from the last 50 years or so. Number 3. James Madison. One of the founding fathers of America and the one that wrote the Bill of Rights and the American Constitution. Yeah, you know, that little piece of paper that grants you all the freedoms that you take for granted today? Yeah, both Republicans and Democrats want to take away your freedom of speech and freedom of expression. He didn't even see the Constitution as a pass of what freedoms the government grants you. He said that the Constitution protects the freedoms that you are born with. He saw those freedoms as a God-given right. Without Madison, Americans wouldn't have those freedoms, and that alone can put him in the top 5, in my opinion. But more so, he started a necessary war with Britain following a British blockade halting most of USA's maritime trade. Ah yes, the British! Provoking wars and then blaming the other side for starting it since the existence of the damn bastards. A war at that time being very unpopular with the Congress, but nowadays in history it is seen as a necessary war, ending the British naval supremacy in the region and establishing America as a superpower. The future is now, old man! Number 2. Thomas Jefferson, the one that wrote the Declaration of Independence and one of the founding fathers of America. During his first term, he made the famous Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon Bonaparte. And it went something like this. Greetings, distinguished manlet. Why wouldn't I take that huge piece of land off of you since you are busy fighting the whole European continent for, let's say, $50 million? Oh oui oui, c'est un maintenant je peux aller en Russie et geler toute mon armée. He built the Library of Congress, which at that time and still to this day is the largest library in the world, believing that the people should educate themselves, thinking that an educated people is a strong people. Yeah, that's why all the governments in the world want you poor and stupid. Long gone are the days when leaders actually cared about their people. Fun fact, he died on July 4th, 1826, only a few hours before John Adams, the second president of USA. Wow, how poetic. He died on the same date he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Honorable mention, John F. Kennedy. Now, I used to not pay too much attention to him. I mean, I used to see JFK as the guy that was shot in the head in the car in Dallas, Texas. The guy that cheated on his wife with Marilyn Monroe, and the guy that was responsible for the Bay of Pigs fiasco. But you gotta give him credit for how he handled the Cuban Missile Crisis and how important and tense were those days in history. You have to realize that the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis was this close to nuclear Armageddon. You gotta give credit to JFK and also to Nikita Khrushchev for having cool heads and not let a drunk cigar chain smoker commie pin two major world powers against each other and make them destroy each other. I wish I could say the same about our current leaders that always poke the bear and escalate nuclear conflict every 5 minutes or so. He also was a World War II veteran in the US Navy. Also, I started having so much respect for JFK after I began questioning history and questioning the state of political organizations and government institutions when I finally started thinking for myself. And I found out and saw evidence that JFK tried to uncover many CIA plots and wanted to dismantle the CIA, and for that we all know what happened. Because he knew and he had evidence about a great deal of things that I cannot say here on YouTube, otherwise the CIA, the ADL, and APAC will knock on my door anytime now. But the CIA kinda admitted they were involved, and they said, what are you gonna do about this, sport? Point is, JFK was the whistleblower president that didn't accomplish very much during his presidency, but he woke up millions of people about the deep state, and I think he did more in death than he did during his lifetime. And this is why he's one of my honorable mentions of one of the greatest presidents USA ever had. Another honorable mention is Dwight D. Eisenhower. USA had a booming economy in the 50s under his administration. The second Red Scare was in full swing. McCarthy persecuted commies in Hollywood and subverters inside USA's institutions. Yeah, the 50s. Good times, good times. He also ended the Korean War that warmonger Harry Four Eyes Truman started and divided a country in two because he wanted to win a dick measuring contest with Mao Zedong. But I digress. Eisenhower understood the importance of some social programs while he cut taxes for the middle-class families and was a president that didn't start any new wars. As was established earlier, he ended a very bloody one. And of course, why I will always love Eisenhower is that he warned us about the US military-industrial complex and how USA will be governed by bloodthirsty corporatists that manufacture weapons of war. And of course, he was an anti-war president. He was the general of the US Army during World War II, and he saw with his own eyes how awful war is. Yeah, too bad politicians of today are so bloodthirsty for war because they never fought in one. Okay, before we get to our number one, I'm gonna say a few words about Trump. Look, I like some aspects about the guy, okay? During his presidency, the US economy was really good for the people. I mean, the best argument for that is look for a grocery bill from 2019 and now go buy the same products on that bill. It will be 4 times more expensive than 5 years ago. And also, the economy for corporate America was perhaps the best for rich people. He didn't start any new wars, so that's a good thing. But he also didn't end any old wars, so he didn't do that much. He also kinda provoked Iran for killing Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The construction of the wall at the border with Mexico was a great idea that the Democrats criticized him so much for it. But Biden also continued to build the wall, so that's that. What I don't like about him is the fact that he's a Zionist first and an American second. He was never America first. No, the ones that fund his campaign comes first and America second. Being a doormat for mega corporations, for the ADL, APAC and Israel as a whole. And now, the number one president in United States history is none other than Jimmy Carter. Should have seen your face! No! I'm of course talking about the man that started it all, and that is of course George Washington. What more can I say about the guy? He led USA in the war for independence from the British Empire as the general of the army. He was a brilliant military strategist. He didn't start any new wars, but he continued some conflicts that were started before the beginning of his presidency. He was against political parties and warned us about the two-party system that recently has become the one-party system disguised as a two-party system. He proclaimed US as neutral in every outside conflict and warned USA to not be entangled in any foreign wars. Yeah, seems like most presidents didn't get the memo. And you know what I think is the best thing about him? He didn't actually want to be president. Many people wanted him to be king and be addressed as Your Majesty, and he didn't want that. He knew about how power can corrupt an individual, and he wanted to create a country free from the tyranny of the empires of old. But unfortunately, that country became one of the biggest authoritarian empires in history. So that's that, the top 5 best US presidents of all time, with a few honorable mentions sprinkled for good measure. Tune in next week when I will do the top 5 worst US presidents in history. Ooh, I sure hope that won't be controversial at all. And also I will expose the ones responsible for 9/11.
Subscribe, you silly Billy!